This morning we start in the most important room in your house, the room where you tend to have important conversations. Your spouse comes into the house and they say to you, "Can we go to that room? We need to talk." I had a great meeting with my boss's boss today. And you know that promotion we've been praying for, that promotion we've been talking about? Well, I got it. The thing is, we need to move to Nairobi to take up the offer. Scenario 2, one of your friends calls and says, "I need your counsel, I need your advice." As you know, Sihle and I have been dating for 3 years, and just the other day we were talking about the future. And it seems that she's not ready to settle down. I mean, we said that we want to do our postgraduate studies, we're now done. Now is a good time to get married, but she's dragging her feet. I think I need to break up with her. Third scenario, you are at the doctor's office and the prognosis is not good. What decision are you making tomorrow? These scenarios are not just make-believe, but it's what happens in our city every day. In fact, some of you who are seated here this morning have had to make and are in the process of making life-changing decisions. Decisions are very much part of life. Even now, as you are seated, you are a collective sum of the decisions that you made or did not make. Some of you will say, no, I'm only here because of my parents, my ancestors' decisions. That is true, but your decisions are also in the mix. By extension, for those of you who are parents, it also says that your children will be where they are or will be where they need to be or not need to be later on in life based on the decisions that you make even today. And so we could say as we kick off our time this morning that the decisions we make and the deliberations we have about those decisions have an impact on our destiny. And so as you can see on the screen, this morning, we're talking about decisions, deliberations, and destiny. And so as we step into this topic, I have a few disclaimers. Hear me well and hear me good, because I don't want you to come see me after the service. Disclaimer number 1, I know that sometimes when we talk about topics such as these, some of us might get triggered. Some will have the propensity to walk out of here feeling less than what they are. But the truth is that a lot of things that happen to us in life, a lot of the solutions we find later on in life only are figured out then, in retrospect. Okay? Therefore, a message such as this is not here to condemn you. It is here to wake you up to your current circumstances and then allow you to move forward. Not to look back in anger and regret, but to move forward with wisdom. Are you hearing me and are you hearing me good? We are not about condemnation, we're about conviction. From here onwards, we move on with wisdom. And yes, and forgive me for this, some of you will walk out of here with more questions than when you came in. And that's okay. Life is sometimes about answering questions. My final disclaimer. It's sad to make this one, but I have to. We've been asking you to read 1 and 2 Samuel, right? I know some of you do, some of you don't, some of you fall asleep. So, in order to cover all of us with the same grace, due to the length of our passage, because we're going to be in Samuel 13 and 14, I'm going to quickly summarize so that we are all on the same page, okay? So when we pull from it later on, you're like, okay, I too can pretend that I read it. Are we together? We've prayed. You've stretched, you've smiled, so let's keep that posture as we go on. And so we are in Israel during the reign of King Saul, and things aren't looking good for the nation. Israel is under the oppression of the Philistines. In chapters 13 and 14, we find a young man by the name of Jonathan. He is Saul's son, and he attacks a Philistine outpost, provoking them to respond in a way that Israel did not expect. The Philistines come back with chariots and horsemen. The text says to us they are so numerous that described like sand on the seashore. At the sight of this vast and great army, Israel is terrified. And these brave men who Saul had called previously now scatter and they hide in caves and pits. And so Saul is only left with 600 men. To make matters worse, the Philistines had removed all the blacksmiths, that is, people who work with iron and metal, from the land of Israel. So there are no weapons in the nation except for Saul and Jonathan are the two with weapons. Everyone else probably had farming implements, forks and whatnot. And they are facing an army that has chariots and warriors. So as the battle approaches, Samuel says to King Saul, "Wait for me at Gilgal." Those of you who've been with us for a while in the series, you would know that this is the second time that Samuel tells Saul to wait for him at Gilgal. And he says to him, wait for him for 7 days. But somehow Samuel is delayed. We are never told why he is delayed. And Saul, waiting for Samuel, sees that the motivation within his army is low. And in fact, the soldiers are deserting him. And in the midst of that, he chooses to sacrifice unto the Lord. Just as he's finished with the sacrifice, Samuel shows up and rebukes him and says, "Why did you do that? You shouldn't have." And Samuel declared that Saul's kingdom would no longer last, and God was already looking for a different king. This was happening to Saul. In the meantime, Jonathan launches a daring mission with only his armor bearer. He trusts God, and he says this in the text, God can save by many or by few. And they climb up a steep towards the Philistine outpost. And there they attacked the people there. Jonathan and his armor bearer were 2, and they fought against 20 men, and they killed them. Then God sends an earthquake into the Philistine camp, and there's chaos there, such that the Philistines are now fighting themselves. When the rest of Israel and Saul hears this, they go into battle and they fight against the Philistines. Even the guys who are hiding in caves come out rushing, looking like brave little men to say, "Yes, we have the victory." As Israel is pursuing the Philistines, Saul makes a vow. The text tells us he makes a reckless vow because he says to his troops, "As we fight, none of you should eat anything." Fight is like intermittent fasting. We're going to fight like that. Jonathan, unaware of the command that his father had given, comes into a field and he takes some honey and he is strengthened. Later on, Saul discovers that somebody broke the oath and that somebody happens to be his son. And because Saul views himself as a virtuous person, he says, even if it's my son, he must be put to death because that's what I would have done to anyone else who broke the vow. This is chapters 13 and 14 in a nutshell. I think that's pretty quick, right? We're all caught up. We are together. It would be good for you to go home and to read those chapters yourselves to make sure that, hey, the pastor didn't just misquote. No. We did a good job. So what are we ought to understand from these 2 chapters? Here's the big idea of the sermon, and we will get into it. God calls his people, that is including you and me, God calls his people to both waiting and moving, and it takes discernment to know which season you're in. Let's say it again. God calls his people to both waiting and moving, and it takes discernment to know which season you're in. So as we look at these 2 chapters, I have 3 big questions. There'll be smaller questions throughout, but there are 3 big questions that we want to answer. First question, when is waiting obedience, and when is it avoidance, rather? When is waiting obedience, and when is it avoidance? Second big question, what does decisive action look like? And thirdly, what role does community play in our decisions. Let's tackle the first one. When is waiting obedience and when is it avoidance? As we start 1 Samuel 13, we see that Saul has been told by Samuel to wait at Gilgal. This is a similar instruction, as we said, to the one given to him in chapter number 10. In chapter number 10, Samuel arrives as promised, but here he is delayed. And when he eventually arrives, he says the following. Saul says the following to the rebuke that he gets from Samuel. When I saw that the troops were deserting me, and you didn't come within the appointed days, and the Philistines were gathering at Michmash, I thought the Philistines will now descend on me at Gilgal, and I haven't sought the Lord's favor. So I forced myself to offer the burnt offering. Samuel said to Saul, you have been foolish. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. It was at this time that the Lord would have permanently established your reign over Israel. But now your reign will not endure. The Lord has found a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him ruler over his people because you've not done what the Lord commanded. Now, when we read the Bible, I believe as a human being that we need to be fair to people. I can imagine being Saul, people are leaving me. At the same time, the enemy is waiting at the gate, coming to defeat me. And the guy who said he'll come and pray for me so I can have victory is not showing up. What am I supposed to do? As humans, we know that waiting is not nice, right? Tell a bunch of kids this afternoon that after lunch we're going to have ice cream. You watch them since the moment your words left your mouth, they're in agony. They agonize through the lunch. They agonize through the conversation because all they're thinking about is what? Ice cream. So I can just imagine Saul waiting for Samuel, and the enemy is coming, and his support system is crashing out. Where is Samuel? Why is he late? The question that I have for God is that, God, why do you want us as human beings to wait? Because you know we're not good waiters. But God would say, I want you to wait because in certain seasons of your life, I am calling you to wait because I want to do something in you. I want you to wait so that I can do something in you. Because waiting in the Lord is not passive absence of activity. We're not just summer waiting. We're not just blowing smoke. When God calls us to wait, it is a season where God teaches us to rest in Him. God says, I want you to learn to trust me in your waiting. Allow me to carry what you have been carrying. It's learning to say, Lord, I don't understand what's happening, but I know you've got me. God says you can't do that when you're busy, but when you're waiting, you can. You can learn to trust. You can learn to say, Lord, somehow I can see or I can sense that you're working. Now, I must admit once more, waiting is not easy. The second reason God wants us to wait is because He wants to repurpose us. Because as we're waiting, God is doing a work within us. He is reorientating, clarifying, stripping away what does not belong, and He's building something new, something fresh in you, something that will allow you to be able to stand up to the next season of life. This is why God calls us to wait. Question for you this morning is, if you're in a season of waiting now, what is the season producing in you? Is your character being shaped? Is your faith being built? Or are you just waiting, Jay? You're just waiting for what might happen. Saul is in a season of waiting. He's been told to wait. But as all the chaos is happening around him, he thinks to himself, this waiting is not helpful. And so he stops waiting because of the circumstances around him. Saul's decision to stop waiting is not because God said it's time to go. No, he was driven by the men who were leaving him. So whatever that season of waiting was meant to build in him didn't materialize. And we will realize as this passage goes on that his lack of waiting changed his destiny. Here's the interesting thing about Saul. When he was appointed as king, God said the following to Samuel about him. 1 Samuel 9 and verse 16. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. God said Saul's mission was to do what? Defeat the very people who were at the door of the nation. So technically, Saul never needed an army to support him to do what God had called him to do. Yet here he was, choosing not to wait, though God had said, you already have the victory. The test of waiting. But here's another truth. There are times when we are found to be waiting when we should not be waiting. See, there are times when God calls us to wait and we should wait, but there are times when we are waiting when we should not be waiting. You know that answer that somebody will give you, why haven't you done this? And they say, I'm still waiting on God. If once God does this, I will do that. But this is when waiting becomes paralysis because it is not producing anything worthwhile in you. Let me give you an example. You find yourself in the same place with the same questions, the same hesitations, the same unresolved intentions that you had a year ago. Nothing has changed. You are no more prepared now than you were last year. Here are some ways that this waiting takes. Waiting as laziness. People say, I'm waiting on God's timing. Actually, what this says that you have not done the work. You've not made the calls, you've not prepared, and now you're using God language to avoid accountability. Waiting as fear management. We know this one. We say, if I never commit, I can never be wrong. If I never try, I can never fail. Because that indefinite wait keeps all options open. It removes all risk in my life. I'm waiting. Actually, you're just afraid. We can have waiting as self-doubt. This is the person who goes over the same decision again and again, seeking more counsel, more confirmation, more prayer. You see the next Christian, hey, what's God saying to you? What's God saying there? Another prayer request of the same thing. And it's not because the path is unclear. You just like the idea of asking more and more and more. There's a lot of doubt in you. Here's the one I love because I think many of us can find ourselves here. Waiting as self-preservation. Keeping every door open because committing to one means closing the rest. You're like that naughty boy who wants to have 5 girlfriends because he's not sure which one's going to say yes. Let's just make sure they're all there. The fear of missing out. Here's the truth, friends. Every significant commitment closes some doors. Every meaningful yes is also a no to something else. Here's what happens when you refuse to close some doors. You are saying, I don't want to live a directed life. I don't want to follow destiny. I want to have everything happening. And truth is, you can't have everything happening. So as we can see in this text, that waiting has some benefits if that's what God has called you to in a season, but waiting can also be unhelpful. So that is waiting. Let's see what our next question is when we look at the flip side of waiting. And our question was, what does decisive action look like? Chapter number 14, verse 1. That same day, Saul's son Jonathan said to the attendant who carries weapons, come on, let's cross over to the Philistine garrison on the other side. However, he did not tell his father. Saul was staying under the pomegranate tree in Migron on the outskirts of Gibeah. The troops with him numbered about 600. Verse 3, Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod, was also there. He was the son of Ahitub, the brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, son of Eli, the Lord's priest at Shiloh. Those of you who've been reading Samuel, all these names are starting to make sense now. There's a picture being drawn. But the troops did not know that Jonathan had left. There were sharp columns of rock on both sides of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine garrison. Remember, the reason that the Philistines came is because of Jonathan. And this guy says, I know I did a naughty thing last time, but once more, I want to do it. I am a troublemaker. And in the midst of the Philistines coming back, he says to his guy, let's cross over. Verse 6 says, Jonathan said to the attendant who carries weapons, come on, let's cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will help us. Nothing can keep the Lord from saving, whether by many or by a few. Dude, I thought there were only 2 weapons in Israel. I thought the army had dwindled to 600. Yet here you are picking a fight. Because Jonathan says, perhaps the Lord can save by many or a few. That phrase, when we read in verse 6, perhaps, it's not the language of certainty. He's not saying that God is, he says, perhaps. It's the language of hope. No one has said to Jonathan, hey, we've prayed and God is going to deliver you. He didn't receive a vision. He didn't receive a prophetic word. But something in him, he says, if I serve God, there's a deep conviction in me that says that God does not need numbers in order to conquer. God needs people who believe in who he is, in his character, and that can be enough. Now, sometimes when people speak like this, we tend to think that they have reckless faith, right? You're just crazy. Jonathan here is not speaking from a point of reckless faith, because he understood that waiting was not going to solve the problem that they were in. But secondly, he measures up the odds that he's against. He is using his reasoning, but then he says, my faith goes above my reasoning. I am not doing this stupidly. I have counted the cost, yet I know that the God I serve can still overcome in this situation. So he says in verse 8, all right, Jonathan replied, we'll cross over to the men and then let them see us, the Philistines that is. If they say, wait until we reach you, then we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come on up, then we'll go up because the Lord has handed them over to us. That will be our sign. And so the first little skirmish he goes into, it's the 2 of them against 20 men. And he says, there's a sign that I am looking for. And he says, when these men call us up, we will know that God has given us the victory. But I love what he says at the latter part of verse 10. But if they say, come up to us, we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands. Watch this. Jonathan doesn't ask for a sign before he says, let's attack. He says, we are attacking. The sign will be that we have victory. In other words, if the sign doesn't come, we're attacking and we'll die. But we're attacking. Don't give me a sign, then I go. No, I am going. Give me a sign as I go. He had already decided. They had crossed over. They had already seen them. There was no going back. Amen. And watch what God does. He confirms the faith of the man who moved. God confirms the faith of the man who moved. We could use another term and say God honored the faith of the man who moved, and they went up and won. while this is happening, Saul is on the other side. We're told he's sitting under a pomegranate tree. And he's with the priest who has an ephod. Now, an ephod was one of the ways that God would communicate to his people via. And they are waiting for a sign, they are waiting for a signal for them to do something. But what are they doing? Nothing. In verse 18 again, when the fight is on and things are hot and they hear commotion, before they join the fight, they ask the priest with the ephod, "Outie, what's God saying? We want a sign so we can go and join." In verse 24, he makes an oath thinking that denying themselves of food will be the reason for victory. So in this passage, we see Saul time and time again looking for a sign in order to move. He wanted a sure thing. Some of you are saying, if the bank gives me the money, I will start the business. If they decline, I don't start. Meanwhile, God is giving you the idea. I think I'm talking to somebody this morning. Why don't you just start? Maybe the bank saying yes will be like, "Oh, you've already started. Awesome." Dare I say, maybe you don't even need the bank, bless God, because you've started. Other people start seeing you and say, "We can invest in you and we won't charge you interest." I'm talking to somebody this morning. Did you know that sometimes God being on your side might mean that you walk into the unknown? See, some of us think that because God is on our side, therefore everywhere we go, we are sure. But that's not always the case. Sometimes God being on your side might exactly mean that you are walking by faith, and the just walk by. Hey, this church. They walk by faith, and sometimes walking by faith means that you're walking into the unknown. Decisive action says the following: God might use me, so I'll step out anyway. God might use me, so I'll step out anyway. And so when the fight goes on and it's becoming obvious that now Israel is winning, the men grow weary from fighting. I'm sure they've been hiding in caves for such a long time, they didn't have any energy. Saul, in the midst of that, makes a vow. He says, no one should eat. Now, we don't know why he makes this decision. Maybe it was out of superstition or doubt. We don't know. Anyhow, in verse 27, we read the following. However, Jonathan had not heard his father make the troops swear the oath. He reached out with the end of the staff he was carrying and dipped it into the honeycomb. When he ate the honey, he had renewed energy. Then one of the troops said, your father made the troops solemnly swear that the man who eats food today is cursed and the troops are exhausted. Two things are happening here. Everyone is famished. Everyone is exhausted. Jonathan hasn't heard the instructions, so he finds honey. And he is strengthened. Here's the interesting thing about this part of the passage, that the honey was in the forest even before Jonathan arrived. Are we agree there? So we can say God placed provision for him even before he had arrived. All along, and we'll see this later in the passage, as the Philistines were leaving, they were leaving food and their goods behind. So in the middle of acting, God had already provided for them everything that they needed. The strength to carry on fighting was present. A strength they would not have known about had they not even begun to fight. Jonathan goes into the forest, he finds the honey and he finds the provision, because he also says, it gave me strength. Small question. Think about the decisions that are sitting in front of you right now. And maybe you've been meaning to do something, take a step, the direction you've been praying about, the door you've been standing in front of for months. What if the clarity, the provision that you seek, the confirmation that you so desperately want to hear is actually within the action. What if God has already placed the plunder and the honey right there in the forest? You can't see it if you're at the edge. You can't experience it if you're outside the action. You need to be there. This is Jonathan. He is in the thick of battle. He finds strength. And the passage contrasts him to his father, who is waiting for a special revelation. A special revelation from God. And the decision that Saul makes, because he's looking for special revelation, is a decision that harms the people. It deprives the people of the provision that God had provided. Because he said, don't eat. Don't find strength. Do you know what ends up happening? They end up breaking the law because they could not even fight as they were so weak. God's provision was made inaccessible, not because God refused, but because the leader was looking for special revelation. See, sometimes the waiting can make you make mabena mistakes. Sometimes waiting will lead you into the wrong places because you aren't moving as God said you should move. So we have Saul who is waiting and breaks his waiting. And then we have Jonathan who is moving. And it would be easy to end the sermon off right here, but he said I should wait. It would be easy because we could say, hey, one is wrong, one is right. Don't do the wrong, do the right. But that would not be a fair analysis of how life works. As we said earlier, there are different seasons that God calls us to. There are seasons of waiting and there are seasons of action. The question that we often have, that many believers tend to ask me as our pastor is this, is how do I discern the way that God wants for me now? How do I discern? How do I know which season I'm in? And that brings us to our third question. What role does community play in our decisions? Verse 14 and 6, Jonathan says his armor bearer, let's. He says what? Let's. Before he takes a single step in whatever direction, Jonathan turns to the persons alongside him and he says, here's what I'm thinking. Here's my idea. What do you say? Even earlier this morning we said it, but we say it here all the time. Community is vital. Community here is vital. Because we don't want you to do church together and just church. We want you to do life together. Because when we do life together, we get to a place where we have those destiny-defining questions. And when we are within a community that we love and appreciate, we can find help. We have brothers and sisters who are praying for us, who will ask us the hard questions when we say we want to jump and they say, what do you mean? See, a lot of people who are in Joburg don't have these kind of relationships. They lack people, they lack community that will actually pray with them. They lack community that will actually ask them the hard questions. Because here in Joburg, we have a saying and we think we can do it all alone. As one philosopher said, it's just me against the world, baby. It's just me. That's the mentality we live with. But God calls Christians to a different way of life. Proverbs 15 and 22 says, plans fail when there's no counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. What do we mean? When you are in a good community, they can help you to discern whether you should wait or go. When Jonathan says to the armor bearer, let's go, his response is, do what is in your heart. Go ahead. I'm completely with you. The language here points to wholehearted unity, not just affirmation. This is not just somebody who just said, just do it. The armor bearer is saying, I'm not giving you permission. No. I'm partnering with you in this endeavor. So as Jonathan moves, he doesn't move alone. It's not an isolated movement. No. He is one with the man next to him. The person has listened, he's discerned, and he says, I'm committed to that which you are doing. And so it shows that, as we said earlier, that faith is not reckless. Because somebody else heard and they waited, they shared it, and they strengthened us. Oh, okay. We believe we can stand with you in this direction. Jonathan's faith is bold. Yes, it's bold. But it is better because somebody else in the community is holding it alongside with him. Jonathan, we've seen you. We know you. Your faith is trustworthy. Because trust me, child of God, that some of you here, if you try to do something and you ask me, I'd say no. Not because you are incompetent, no, but because your faith is not there yet. One hit and you will die. Then you say, where's God? And our job as a community to say, yes, but not yet. Let's see your faith grow. That's why we say here, pray for one another. Know each other. So when seasons change, you're not going to that season alone, but people are holding you up. Church should be the last place, and Pastor Wilson preached about envy a few weeks ago. Church should be the last place where envy thrives. You know, there's this thing in Joburg that I don't want people to know what I'm doing because they'll be envious. They shouldn't see my new house or my new car because they'll be jealous. It shouldn't happen in the house of God. And that's speaking to both those of you who are getting the new house and the new cars and those of you who are around those people. God's word should be working on both. It should be that I am thinking of this and people at church are able to say, we're praying with you or we'll support you or don't do that. Not because we're jealous, but because, it's just not a good look. Or it's not the right season, it's not the right time. The whole idea of community is so we can help shape each other's faith, so that in season of action, we can encourage you and say, go. We are ready with you, heart and soul. But also in seasons of waiting, we can genuinely hold you. We can journey with you as God forms you, as He repurposes you, because waiting is often more painful than going. If you have genuine community, we sit and we weep with you. When you feel that God is not even hearing you, we are here. And because we know you, will say, yes, it's painful, yes, it's hard, but stay. Because God is doing something in you in the season, and we're here for it. At the end of chapter number 14, we see the community of Israel do this. When Saul finds out that somebody has broken the oath, he says, we need to put this man to death. And of course, when he finds out it's his son, he still says, this needs to happen. But listen to what the community says to the king. Verse 45. But the people said to Saul, must Jonathan die? He accomplished such a great deliverance for Israel. No, as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground. For he worked with God's help today. So the people redeemed Jonathan, and he did not die. Listen to this. When Jonathan moved and the moving was costly, the people covered him. They were choosing to disobey the king. They covered him. Faithful community doesn't just push you to the cliff. We don't just say, just go, go. We also stand behind you when the cliff turns out to be more dangerous than anticipated. Because we said that we're in it for the long haul. We cover your back when stepping out costs you something. This is why we say, be in community. As I conclude, I want to give us two pictures. The first picture that will go up on the screen is the pomegranate tree. Saul is sitting under a pomegranate tree on the outskirts of Gibeah. He's got 600 men with him, but there's a battle going on. He's sitting there because, yes, in the beginning, there was a command that said wait, and it was right and good, but that waiting turned into something else. The waiting turned into something else. The waiting went from obedience to fear and crowd dependence. As we said, a waiting that can bring paralysis. One of the most devastating verses I read about Saul is in chapter 14, verse 46. It says, then Saul gave up the pursuit of the Philistines, and the Philistines returned to their own territory. Because we know the whole story, we know that the Philistines will continue to be a thorn on Saul's side until he dies. His dependency on rituals, on oaths, meant that what? At that moment, he couldn't pursue the Philistines because the men were exhausted. And in him not doing what God had appointed him to do, his destiny is changed forever. Because when we come to chapter 15, chapter 16, it's these people who are back. God said, I've appointed you to kill a giant, but somehow, in your disobedient waiting, you didn't do it. Some of you are sitting under a tree even this morning. The tree is not a safe place. It feels safe. But know this, even as you sit under the tree, the enemy continues to assemble. And the man or woman of God that you've been called to is not being formed because you are sitting under a pomegranate tree. But as we said earlier, the waiting that he had been first given was a good wait. And there are seasons of life where God calls us to wait, where God says, don't go yet because I am building you. There's something I'm calling you to, but before you get to the thing I'm calling you to, you must go through some exercises. And so I need you to know this morning that if you're in a season of waiting, you are not a failure. Seasons of waiting are not weaknesses. Therefore, stop feeling mopey and down. Take the time to fill yourself with God. Develop a conviction about that which you've been called to do. Rest in Him. Yes, rest in Him genuinely. Be repurposed. But ultimately trust that when the season is over, when the season of waiting is over, God through His Word, God through His Spirit, and God through the honest voice of community will say, now is time to go. You need to have that eyesight and that ear as you're in a season of waiting that yes, this is not forever. God will call me out, but for now, let me enjoy, yes, dare I say, enjoy my season of waiting. Final picture, and that is the cliff. This is when the season of building and waiting is over, and God says, go. But even that needs a step of faith. The text is very clear. When Jonathan and his armor bearer went, it was a steep place. Just because the robot is green doesn't mean it's smooth sailing. It's go, and it requires faith. And going by faith also trust that God has already provided for me. Even before I get to where I need to get to, God has sustenance. God has strength that I need there. Jonathan finds the honey in the forest, the provision that he so desired. And the text is so clear. It says, when he had the honey, he was strengthened and his eyes lit up. But he had to be in the thick of things. He had to be in the middle of what was happening. The Christian life has different seasons, and there'll be seasons of waiting, which are good, but they'll also be painful. There'll be seasons of ascending cliffs, and they will require you to give your all. As I do my final conclusion, remember what we said at the beginning? That there might be more questions than answers. Because for some of us, we generally don't know which season we're in right now. Some have been in action for too long, others have been waiting forever. And so we don't know. And even as we hear this word, we're like, I hear you, but so what do I do now? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pray that God would show us the season that we're in, so we know. Am I waiting when I should be going? Am I going when I should be waiting? Then we're going to pray that God gives us the grace to wait well. Then we're going to pray that God gives us the boldness to take action. And then we're going to pray that God gives us the love and the wisdom that we need from our community in either season.